Welcome to Get Big Out Loud Radio, where we explore living the complex, funny, and beautiful ride of life with me, Kari Knutson, and Dr. Pat on TransformationTalkRadio.com. Are your thoughts keeping you small? Are you ready to get big? I will offer you ideas to transform what you are thinking into conscious action. Explore what is keeping you small and how to shift your behaviors in order to get big. Learn what is possible for you. Get ready to get big and live life out loud starting now.
Dr. Pat and I get to take this amazing, beautiful ride of life with the most incredible Kari Knutson. Just for you to know, Kari is a master's degree professional speaker, a school counselor, storyteller, mother. We have yet to do the rap thing yet, but closet rap artist. Travels, chronic extrovert, but more importantly, she is an expert in the field of emotional intelligence and human development. And you know, her company and what she does is she brings this message of how all of us can be out in the world and be ourselves. What does it mean to get big out loud? Does it mean to be able to step out on the stage of your life in a way that you've never done before? Because where we are right now, and in me talking to so many people, what I'm realizing, we've never needed Kari and what she does more than we do now. You know, for whatever reason, we feel like we want to shrink back. We want to hide. You know, it was also, I was reflecting on a childhood experience I had that really wasn't abnormally psychologically deformed or defective. I was just an introvert. So sitting in the closet under the stairwell, making my little camp was what I loved to do. But in the world we live in now, that's not the solution if you want to bring a message out there. She's also wrote, directed, and stars in the One Woman Storytelling Show. We'll get an update on that. But today we're talking about something so important. What does it mean to hold opposites? What does that look like? What does that feel like? What is the sludge we carry around from comparative thinking? And what is it we do when we stop our lives based on our view of what somebody else got going on? Kari, great to have you. Great topic. Let's talk about, what do you mean? Let's talk about holding opposites. Let's talk about what we're talking about when we're looking at competing ideas.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about holding opposites because I feel like that's what a lot of us are trying to do right now, given the state of the world. And it's a lot of global things going on, national things, global, and then a lot of personal and professional things going on. And we have to hold all these things. And sometimes this idea of holding opposites is like, I am so concerned about the world that we're living in. And I'm having like acknowledging like, oh, and I'm having some joy in my life that I want to make sure I acknowledge. Or I'm having personal, let's say I'm having something going on in my personal life, and then I look at the world and I'm like so concerned about that I negate, you know, my own concerns because it's so much bigger. So this idea of holding like opposite truths, opposite ideas, opposite feelings, things that are like so big and heavy, but like two things that could pull us, and holding opposites too feels like, for me too, like how do you go on with your day-to-day life when you feel like the world's on fire? And the like, holding two opposite kind of ideas, even about yourself, like seeing yourself as, you know, a go-getter in some areas and professionally, and then maybe in your personal life struggling with something. So again, it could mean anything like that, but it's the idea of holding two things at the same time, holding two truths.
Yeah. So let me tell you a very specific example, since you did mention me a little bit there. So right now, I hold the expansion of the network and what we're doing in a very positive light. My professional platform, Unstuckable, all of these things coming together. On the other hand, I'm now very concerned about a check from the government that I get every month not getting here. And according to the headlines, that's not going to get here in April. So how do you balance the idea of what that check means that I get every month, right? Why? Because I paid into that program. So therefore, I get to take stuff out now. But what happens if I have to worry about what's going to happen a month from now? April 1st, well, no, it's not the 1st, it's April 18th or something. So how do I hold these things in the space, right, of what we're talking about? I think that's partially what you're referencing, because that idea of that not getting that check in April, that's on the government platform. That's what's going on outside of myself. But
Mhm.
yet I can't ignore it.
No, you can't ignore it. And that's why it kind of holds us this idea of like this tension between holding two things. Like if you look at your day today, am I okay today? Am I safe today? Are things okay today? And then our brain, of course, thinking, well, what about in the future and what might happen and what could happen? What if the check doesn't come? How will I handle it? And so, like living in the present in the future is another way too of holding opposites, because you are still living in this moment and recognizing like what is happening today, and then future thinking, right? Where sometimes we get so lost in future thinking, we create incredible anxiety around things that haven't happened yet, things that could happen, things that might happen, things that might not happen. And so that's really a tense place to be. It creates a lot of anxiety for people. And I think a lot of people are feeling exactly what you're saying right now. Like, how do I try to manage that? That's why I wanted to have a podcast on this today, to talk about some ideas around how our brain tends
Yeah.
to spiral around those things and how to bring it back to the present with being realistic about managing our fears and anxieties and worries.
Well, let's talk about one of the things on the top of your list, which is comparative suffering. Now, I love this term. I don't love the dynamic of it, but let's talk about it. You know, when you're talking about comparative suffering, you're looking at almost like a binary code. Somebody wins, somebody loses, right? I mean, that's kind of, even though we don't say it out loud, right? In my case, I'm not sure who's going to win. Maybe the government's going to win by cutting, I don't know, like how many $880 billion from a fund that most of us paid into. Maybe they're going to win from that. But the rest of us, that's going to be a painful moment there, Kari. That's
Yes.
like a pain moment. That's like, ouch.
When it's illegal and wrong too. Let's just say that too.
I didn't want to go there just yet, but it is illegal and it is wrong. And yet at the same time, I have never felt so absolutely helpless. And so where do we go with that? Where's the rage? So, okay. So for me, I call my senators and I'm like, what are you two doing?
Mhm.
I'm like, ladies, what are you doing? Where's your backbone? Well, I know Patty Murray is speaking up, but I'm looking at the rest of the people and I'm thinking, my friend sends me messages and all they say is WTF. That's what they say. Because people just don't know how to do this. Now, we're talking about one thing, but this comparative suffering happens every day of our lives. It happens with our kids. You know, our kids right now. I was reading an article, Kari, about are is this generation that is so plugged into social media, is this going to damage them? I was reading an article about that. Social media, especially if you plug in other than educational information, like I look something up, how are we using that? And what are we doing when we assess ourselves and how well we're doing in the world based on what Demi Moore might be doing? I love Demi Moore, by the way. I love Demi Moore. Should
Well,
have won the Oscar.
let me address what you were talking about with comparative suffering, so we can tell you like what it is. So the idea of comparative suffering is that usually in our brains, what we do is we have some level of suffering or concerns or angst or anxiety, whatever you want to call it. I'm calling it suffering at some level. Um, you can capture that word meaning a lot of things, but the idea is like most people have something that they're suffering with or through, or an idea, a situation, something that's happening. And then what we do is test that out with the rest of the world and say that we look to other people in situations and we say, oh my gosh, these people have it so much worse. I shouldn't feel that bad because at least I have blah, blah, blah. Or I should look for the silver lining. Or it's first world. Some people say, oh, first world problems, like when comparing it. And so usually what happens in comparative suffering is we lose because we're comparing, and it becomes like who wins in the suffering game and who loses. And the problem with comparative suffering is when you think about comparing it, all it does is minimize the legitimacy of your own feelings. So it takes away the fact that, like, yes, someone else can be suffering and I can be suffering too. And instead of like weighing it out, who's going to win and who's going to lose, then you say, like, what if their suffering exists and mine does too? So the idea that like comparative suffering just makes somebody lose, it still negates your own feelings. You still have to do something with your feelings. And it doesn't really, to me, change the narrative of like what is actually happening for me, because I am my own world. So if I am suffering in some way, it is it is my world, and then I can look out as a person and see rest of the suffering going on in the world, or issues, but it still doesn't take that away to say, well, I know it's a first world problem, but, or I know I shouldn't feel this way, but, or okay, let's say like you and I are talking, Dr. Pat, and I am not drawing social security yet, right? But you are worried about your social security check, and I think, well, I shouldn't be upset that I have to figure out car payment because I don't have to deal with Social Security, and I had my car broke down and I have to pay all this money and figure out my car payment. I shouldn't even be worried about that compared to like that's really bad. But at the end of the day, if we talk about it, I can still be sad about your check and be worried
Yeah.
about my car
Yeah.
payment and my bill, right? So two things can be
Yeah.
true at the same time, which is why holding opposites. And people too, I want to say this thing about truth. Sometimes when we say truth, we have to distinguish it from facts. And the idea is like your truth is yours, however you see the world. My truth is mine. And I always say, I like this saying, there are always three truths in any situation: your truth, my truth, the actual truth, and then facts. And better to debate the facts of things than to try and deny someone your truth. Like
Yeah.
if I said, "Oh, Dr. Brett, don't worry, it'll probably be okay. Your check will come. Stop worrying about it." All your brain is like, "No, like I can't." Right? Or if you said to me, "Well, Carrie, it's not that big a deal that you can't figure out your car payment. I mean, just take the bus." I'm like, okay, right. So see how we do that to other people though? We like,
Yeah.
and then both people lose. And what's hard is we still have to process our emotions. So I feel like there is honestly, I feel like there's no hierarchy of personal suffering. We can look out in the world and see degrees of suffering for sure. But when you start to judge your personal suffering, I just don't think we should do that in a way. There's no hierarchy of suffering. And I think if you can see that and then you can own your own stuff, you won't seek out comparative suffering in an effort to diminish what you're actually going through. Because part of holding opposites is the ability to process what you're going through and get to emotional resiliency. That's
Yeah.
why it's important to start with the idea of we can hold two things to be true and we should stop doing comparative suffering.
I agree with you. And one of the things that is so important about that is learning how to master the art of empathy, where you can actually feel for somebody else without diminishing your own level of feelings. And I think that's what we're talking about here today. Somebody was asking me and said, "What are you worried about?" They're ready for this conversation. Can't even say it on here. I'm so embarrassed. A friend of mine was talking to me and said, "What are you worrying about? They're not cutting Social Security. They're only cutting the Social Security staff in half." And I looked at my friend and I said, "Oh my gosh." And so how long have you been this is what I said, "How long have you been an organizational consultant?" "Oh, about 30 years." I said, "Are you bleeping kidding me? You know better than anybody, like I know better than anybody, when you cut a workforce in half. I don't care if you're like an ice cream chain. If you cut your workforce in half, you and I both know it takes 6 months to a year to realign responsibilities. And the first thing that goes is customer service." So people think about it in different ways. So my friend is like, "Well, what are you worried about?" "I'm not worried. They're only cutting the staff in half." And I'm thinking, oh, actually, that's kind of worse than I thought it was. We're
Right.
after his information,
Right.
right?
But see how we tell ourselves stories and ideas about like what makes it right or wrong or
Exactly.
we make up these stories in our own
Yeah,
worlds.
like, don't worry. They're only cutting the staff in half. Don't worry, Pat. What are you worried about? Shouldn't be worried. And so what we're saying is, I don't know if I should be worried or not, but I know in the back of my mind, I'm not going to be with my head in the sand about what's going on that affects me. And I think what we're saying is, why can't both of us have an opinion? You know, why can't both of us agree that, yes, they're cutting the staff? But this is just one simple thing. We do this all the time. It isn't just about something that major. We do it all the time. Kari, what are you talking? I have a friend whose car has been in the shop for 4 months. So to tell my friend, my 88-year-old friend, just take the bus or just
Right. But
you're
see all
just
this
like, dude, just take the bus or the Uber. We live in Washington State, not the best transportation. No, I'm going to go pick him up and take him to where he wants to go. He wants to go shopping for groceries. Uh, It's interesting how we don't want to hear somebody else because it's so close to home sometimes. That level of pain, let's just call it that level of pain that another person expresses, even like your car's in a shop, you don't have a car. But that level of pain triggers something in another person. The question is, how do you control your trigger?
right. And
How do you control it?
right, and how do you create space to let, again, multiple truths be what they are? And also, I think our idea of trying to fix other people, like, it's not that big a deal, just do this. It's not that big a deal, just do that. Don't worry, be happy. Look on the bright side, find the silver lining. Like, it's this almost compulsive, habitual trying to be positive, which is, some people call it toxic positivity, which is like, I can solve your problem, I can figure this out, instead of just saying, which is like so hard sometimes to just get in the mindset, instead of just saying, I'm so sorry that's happening to you, that sounds rough, tell me more about what's going on with you. Like, it's inviting the person to talk rather than shutting down or trying to fix their problem. It's also like with your friend, the truths that are happening versus the facts. The fact is they're cutting positions, right? The truth is, for her, she sees that as not that big a deal because of blah blah blah. You see it as a big deal because of blah blah blah, right? So like, that's where the conversation goes, and that's where you like kind of reality test other people's views. But also, you can't, sometimes it's like, well, let's just talk about the facts then. Right? And because a lot of what we do is diminish our feelings, push them away, negate them, make them seem unimportant. And then we all have these private lives where we're like trying to process our emotions like on our own, instead of doing it with other people, which would be much better. If
Yeah.
I could say, like, I'm having this issue. Oh my gosh, how are you doing that? Okay, I'm having this issue. How are you doing that? Like, that would create some openings for really recognizing and validating our feelings instead of negating or minimizing them. And that's part of what I think is so important about a conversation, is that a lot of people have a lot of emotions going on right now, understandably. What are we going to do with them? Where do they go? And the worst thing you can do is do that comparison and then lose, and somehow your stuff isn't as important as
Yeah.
everyone else's.
That is the harshest thing to do. And more friendships are broken over that. We've seen, honestly, more friendships and family members have been broken over this past election than I can even remember. And it isn't a question mark, or let me just hear what you have to say. Let's talk about dualistic thinking. It's literally, I'm right, you're wrong. And it doesn't matter which side of anybody's fence you're on, I'm right and you're wrong. And what that was all about, I've never seen something so polarizing that
Well,
I did
and
this past
that
holiday season.
that plays in a little. So the idea of dualistic thinking that you're talking about is so important, because our brains do tend to notice your brain, like, even like when we have a yes, no, right, wrong, good, bad, I like it or I didn't. And we sometimes miss out on the more nuanced ideas when we engage in dualistic thinking of, I like this and here's what I want to change, or that was pretty good but I didn't like this part, or I'm so excited about this and completely anxious and I hope I figure it out. Right? Like, whatever it is, the idea of dualistic thinking, we have to be able to recognize when our brain is doing that, because it really essentially, I think, cuts off a lifeline to managing our emotions, which is, like, let's say, if I think of the podcast, was it good or was it bad? That is very limited way of thinking. Like, this part was good, I like this, there's room for improvement here, here's how we do this better. That's more nuanced, that's more realistic. But if your brain gets into that, oh look, I messed up this part, I didn't do good with that, and then you usually go to, this wasn't good and therefore I am what, a failure, not good, whatever.
Not good.
So the line of thought that goes from there is really hard. So like just notice when your brain does it. Does this like right, wrong, good, bad, yes, no, and like, oh, I see you doing your dualistic thinking. And part of it is an invitation. How can I be more nuanced to express myself deeper than it was good, it was bad, I'm fine, I'm okay. Like, or the experience was good or not. Like,
Yeah.
challenge yourself to think, to notice that, and then to think, what would I do if I had to kind of finish my sentence there, or like write, if you're like, your English teacher would say, write a little more here, right? Say a little more about that. Be
Yeah.
more nuanced.
Well, let's talk about where this comes from and how it shows up today. See, I think one of the greatest misconceptions we have is we believe that emotions represent the most simplest of things in the world, and they don't. Let's talk about what we're talking about. If you grew up in a family where suck it up, move on. So it's interesting because, my best friend grew up in a family where it was, oh, please, just suck it up, move on. So much so, this is so funny. I was talking to Linda about this over the weekend. I said, do you remember the Christmas that we had? Because look, I am quite clumsy sometimes, and I don't think sometimes. I just live on another planet. So one year I broke a glass bulb on a Christmas tree. And I thought I got it all up, but I didn't. And it was late at night, and the dog apparently felt, let me break a few more. Knocks him off the tree, and out I go in the middle of the night, and I'm hearing things, and you could hear me in my bare feet, crunch, crunch, crunch. So go to the holiday, famous holiday stories. Go to the hospital, and pulls out all the glass in my feet, and da 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 da, and I come back home. And I'm feeling okay. Then the next day, we're going to have the holiday dinner at Joan's house. And I'm like, there's something still wrong in my foot. No, there isn't. We went to the doctor, and he pulled it all out. And I'm like, okay, an hour goes by. And I'm like, OMG, there's something still in my foot. And I'm like, you know what? I still think there's something in my foot. Oh, that's just your mind playing tricks on you, right? And then I'm like, took my sock off, and I said, my foot is bleeding because there's something in my foot. And I think it was Linda's mother that stepped in and said, because 5 other people wanted to get on with Christmas, and they were like, just suck it up, Pat. There's nothing wrong with your foot. We took you to the doctor yesterday. And Joan, I think, was the one that said, Bjorn, Linda, get her right back to the hospital and tell that doctor he did a lousy job on her foot. Because the reality was, my world was, there's still something in the foot. But rather than anybody stop for a minute and explore that, and I'm giving you a simple example because we all bring our personal agendas to the table. We all do. So why would you grow up in a family where they would say to you, Kari, you're never going to get anywhere in life if you complain about everything. Why are you complaining about this? And by the way, I've been in my world, and we've gone through 18 presidents and da 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 da. Why are you worrying about anything? And if you grow up in that versus, honey, you're crying. Is there something going on? I don't understand why Bambi got killed. Bambi's mom, this is a true story. This is me. I don't understand why Bambi's mom got killed. Now, why would anybody kill Bambi's mom? Whatever it is. But I don't understand it. So the answer would be, honey, it's just a movie. No, it's not a movie. I'm like a young kid. It's not a movie to me. You just killed a deer. It's not a cartoon to me. Honey, it's just a cartoon. It's just a movie. It's not real. You see, but I didn't grow up with that. I grew up with, it is sad, isn't it? Why was that important to me? Because my mom died. You see, my mom died when I was 6. So any killing of any kind of mom, and I don't care what cartoon it is, it could be Ninja Rangers, would have an impact on me. But emotions are complex, and let's talk about them, because what we say and how we say it in the world is important. And I'm not saying, Kari, that sometimes we have to speak out.
Right,
See,
well, let's go back to what you said, though, because one of the things
sure,
that's really important to bring up is that a lot of us grew up in families where emotions were not allowed to be expressed or were negated or weren't important. And your story is actually, the story about the glass in your foot is really important because it just shows like sometimes we know how we feel and then people say, no, you don't. And then you're like, yes, I do. And they're like, no, you don't. And also, there's no time for that, or we have other things doing. It's not a priority. So then we start to internalize those messages like, can I trust myself? Obviously not. Is there time for me? No. Is this a feeling I can express? No. So even if someone doesn't say it overtly, sometimes it is overt, but sometimes it's like that experience. Like, we took you already, you're done, get on with it. But you're like, no, I know how I feel. And so it's important to recognize that even expressing feelings for a lot of people comes with baggage. It like, I don't have a right to express my feelings. My feelings are important. I was told just to suck it up or stop crying, or I'll show you something to cry about. I'll get, that old thing, stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about. So you better not cry because you don't have any, your feelings aren't valid. And again, there's the underlying message. Your feelings aren't valid. And secondly, you can't trust yourself to have the feeling. And so sometimes people really shut down. So we have to bring up this idea when we say, like, figure out how you feel about something. A lot of people either think it's stupid to do this. I have two feelings, good and bad. I'm either happy or I'm sad or whatever. Like, they don't want to go into the nuance, or they think it's stupid, or they don't see the value in it, or it triggers things in them that are like, it's not safe for me to do this. So why do I want to do it now? And part of understanding that is, if you can even get that far back into your story to be like, where did I get this message from? Where did it come from? And then just acknowledge, like, I understood it this way as a child. And now, as I've grown up and become an adult, I am not in that same situation. And find a way to say, is it safe for me to express myself now? Are there people that I could express myself now? Would I be willing to try? Would I go to a therapist or a counselor to practice, right? Saying my truth in a non-judgmental space. So part of that is realizing how you grew up, how
Yeah.
that's impacting you now, and what you might give yourself in terms of permission to actually feel your feelings. And again, don't take it for granted if you're one of those people like, what? Would someone have problems expressing their feelings? Yeah, a lot of people do. A lot of people do.
In this country, a lot of people do. In the
Hmm.
United States of America. And that's an interesting dynamic. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to talk about how does this show up in our families and our real life, and what can we do about it? And what do we learn from growing up with our parents, our family? What would make it easier for me to accept breakups, for example, in my life? Was it my mom's divorce? What was that? When we come back, we're going to talk about it. But here's the message really to think about. What Kari is talking about has a ripple effect. See, we're not just talking about, ew, am I not going to get that check in April? We're not talking about that. We're talking about the many different interconnected parts there are to that in my brain, you see. Now there's the world, but what the heck is interconnected in my brain? What's going on in my brain? Do
Hmm.
I call the companies that I pay bills to from that? What's in my brain? What am I thinking? Is it going to help me act, which Mama Doris was always great for, or is it going to keep me stuck? Kari, before we go to break, how do people find out more about you? How do they work with you, especially on something like this? Because you are an emotional intelligence expert.
Yes, well, you go to knutsonspeaks.com, and on there is every way to contact me, and it has my course offerings, my presentations. And really, the goal of everything I do is the idea of get big, and the peacock is to connect with other people in ways that help us get big, especially in trying times, especially when things are difficult, especially when we're trying to figure out a way forward. And that is the goal, to reduce suffering and increase our ability not just to survive, but thrive through so many things. So that's where you can find out about Knutson Speaks, is on my website.
Let's take a short break. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of the real life examples in life that happen to us. And how does it work if your best friend shares something so personal, maybe even so devastating? How do you take that in? How can you be passionate and compassionate, but clearly understand your boundary line? Very blurred line. That was like a song. Let's take a short break. We'll be right back. Hey, everybody, welcome back. You're listening to Get Big Out Loud. Today, we're talking about holding opposites. How do you do that? This is something that's so seriously important to learn how to do. And again, go to KnutsonSpeaks.com to find out everything about Kari. And this is an area of expertise that she works with people. She has a phenomenal coaching platform. This is where you can get some help on this. And there are some things that you just take for granted, Kari. Now, we gave a couple of extreme situations, but it actually are the small little accumulated comparative suffering items, these things that build up, that start to chip away at everything, including our self-confidence and self-worth. Now, let's talk about this. I shared a story earlier about how this was. Now I will tell you, I grew up in an emotional family, and Mama Doris, my stepmom, allowed us to continue to be emotional about things, because I just shared with you, when Marilyn Monroe died, my mom like cried for 3 days. So that part of it was allowed to be present in us and be present in our family. But let's talk about how this shows up, how the idea of not being allowed to cry plays out on people.
Yeah, well, and especially if you think back to childhood, like any childhood experiences where you received messaging about, is it okay for me to express myself or not? Is it okay to cry or not? Sometimes those were overt things that people said, don't cry, or I'll give you something to cry about, or we don't cry here, or get over it. But then sometimes what people did is, a situation on its face, let's say, was fairly neutral, and then we make up a story about what is safe for us or not to do. So no one says it overtly, but we tell ourselves it's not safe, I can't do it, and here's why. Like, even for my own life example, I can think of how I did this to myself. It took me a while to figure out why I had done this, but I had this I don't know, I don't want to call it a rule, but it was an idea about, like, I should not cry in front of anyone. I should not express myself in front of anyone. Not because someone said no, don't do it, but because I looked around as a child. I thought, oh my goodness, there's a lot going on in my family right now. My parents are getting divorced. My mom's going to be a single mom. My dad's, he came out as gay when I was 8, and he was trying to go figure out his gay life without getting fired from a job in the
Mm.
70s, like as a teacher, right? So he was on his own journey, and he had been repressed for so long. It was his own kind of work to come out and figure out his life. That left my mom with 2 kids, me, and then my sister, who had been adopted from Vietnam, who was facing her own issues related to being adopted, um, having some attachment disorders things, and having some other issues. So my mom was really focused on her. So when I looked around as an 8-year-old and I saw this, I thought, I better be really good because everyone else has a lot going on. And the interesting thing is that that's just a story I told myself. No one said you better be good because we have a lot going on. If I would have chosen to say I want some attention, or I need to tell you something, I'm sure my parents would have said, of course. But I told myself that story. And then the story stayed with me, is like, I better not cry. Or like, I would do this comparative, essentially, suffering. If I didn't get a part in a play, uh, and I was sad about it, I felt like, this is sad, but not as sad as my mom having to deal with this, or my dad doing that, or my sister doing this. Like, whatever it was, I would look at my little slight, or my friend was mean to me, or I didn't get a part in a play, or I'm stressed about my test. It all didn't seem anything compared to when I looked around, at my family. So I made up this thing of, don't cry, don't be emotional, just be fine, just be good. But I did it. I did it. And again, I just say this because sometimes we don't know where things come from until later. Like, why did I do that? Well, this is a story I made up about, like, how and where I could express myself. And it seemed to me that this was the best way to go about it. But without another reality test of someone saying, like, hey, how are you doing? Or what might you need? Or what's going on for you? Or someone to say, hey, it's okay that this is going on in your family, but you might still have some needs. Like, that would have been a nice thing, but it didn't happen, right? So then I go through life, and eventually I have a boyfriend in college, and I knew I was going to cry about something. We were talking about something. I was getting really emotional. And I said, I have to leave because I'm going to cry. And he's like, why do you have to leave? I'm like, because I don't cry in front of people, is what I said. And he said, you don't cry in front of people? I said, no. And he's like, well, can you practice just staying here and crying in front of me? It was weird because I'm like, now I'm gonna have to express. And it was so silly and funny. But I look back at that little moment of like when he said, "Can't you just cry in front of me?"
Yeah.
I was like, "Can't I? Can I? Do I have permission?" And this is really the end of, the point of the story is like sometimes we need permission either from other people, but usually from ourselves to say, I have a feeling and I want to express it. Is it safe for me? Do I have permission? And I didn't realize that I had told myself this story for so long that I generated this and then I was seeking permission. And when he said that, it was it was like a real wake up aha moment for
Yeah.
me. And I think it's also interesting why I eventually went into counseling and becoming a therapist because I feel like creating a space for people to express all kinds of things is incredibly valuable and not being judgmental in the process. People have a lot of things to share, a lot of things to process, a lot of and like holding that space for people like you can do it here and it's safe. I think that's a driving force for me because I
Yeah.
feel incredibly valuable to our evolution as people, to how we accept and love ourselves, how we think about things. And I also, in that situation, have to acknowledge like, I did that to me based on what was going around. And I'm not blaming anyone for that, but I learned a lot about myself from that situation. And so,
Yeah.
again, you can hold two things to be true. Like, could someone have done something different? Could my parents have done it? Yeah. But I don't want to blame them for that. I want to like acknowledge it. Is it sad that it happened? Did I learn from it? Yes. See, like those things can both exist. And that's why I wanted to share that story because sometimes it's externally people telling us, and sometimes it's internally what
Yeah.
we stories and ideas we create for ourselves.
It's really interesting. I am doing an analysis, so the psychological analysis on the Matrix movies, 1, 2, and 3, and then of course 4. But I had to rewatch them to do this analysis that I was asked to do. And I was okay pretty much, right? Except when it got to the last one. And I'm sitting there and I'm watching it. Of course, Linda's like, oh my God, are you obsessed with the Matrix? And so, anyway, watching the last one and the ending of the movie. Okay, people, if you haven't seen the ending of the Matrix 3, just going to tell you this is like, I'm going to leak some information. Trinity dies. And so I'm watching that and my heart just broke again. See, the first time I saw that, I just bawled my eyes out. I didn't care what the rest of the movie was about. And I think the makers of the movie realized they underplayed that scene and underplayed the power of Trinity because in The Matrix 4, she became the star. I think they learned something from that. But why was I reacting to that? It wasn't just about her dying. And so what did you say? I thought about this for myself. And I was like, what's going on here, Pat? You can't watch that scene. I don't care what it is. It's so hard for me and I will cry. So here's what I discovered in this last go around. She had a rebar go right through her body. My spiritual mentor, Sidonia Cahill, died on a trip in Morocco that I was supposed to go on with her, but I couldn't because the Jeep turned over and and she got thrown out of the Jeep and a piece of metal stake went right through her heart. And why did that make me cry? Because Neo had a moment where he could say a few things to her. So she didn't die instantaneously. And see, I had to take my big fat psychology degree and say, what are you reacting to, Pat? Well, every woman in my life that has died, I did not have time to say anything to them.
Hmm.
So now people, if you're thinking that I need therapy, I have had a lot of therapy, but it's okay to feel that emotion and understand why you're feeling it and miss the person that is no longer with you. Now,
Yes.
Linda sees me crying, right? And she could have a moment of like seriously crying because Linda, she could have a moment like seriously crying over the Matrix, but she doesn't do that. And I just looked at her and the tears are coming down my face. And she just looks at me that moment that you know that this is your best friend who understands that this is painful for you to watch.
Mhm.
See, even though inside of her, she's probably thinking, what can I do? How can I help? What's going on? She's able to be in that place and still acknowledge where I am. And that is what we're talking about
Well, and
today.
that's great that someone knows you enough to know why you'd be crying about that, right? And it's great that you know that it's not the thing. Usually the thing, they're watching a movie and someone dies. Okay, that's not the thing. Usually when we get emotionally triggered by something, we have to take a few step back. What's the thing about the thing? Right? And you're saying, which is such beautiful self-awareness, all the women in my life that have died, I haven't been able to say goodbye to. And in this
Sudden
moment,
death.
like it's just like it triggers something for you. So this is a really beautiful part about being self-aware. All of us have things that are going to trigger us like that. All of us have stories and things, but some of us won't take the time to go back a little bit, like, why is this hard for me? Why is this coming up for me? And then you could squash it in that moment. That's the other thing. You can have this, like, I'm trying at a stupid movie, right? It's just a movie. No, what a person who's really thinking about self-awareness and self-evolution would be like, I know exactly why I'm crying about this. And I know this is actually healthy for me to express my emotions now, because how many times could I not express my emotions through the years around someone dying in this way? And then this is a healthy way for me to connect and express with that emotion, right? Around loss, around not having time, around death, around all the things. So part of it is, I feel like it's a conduit to being able to express
Yeah.
emotions, and you're self-aware enough to tie into, it's not like, why am I crying? I don't know. I know exactly why I'm crying. I know exactly. And that's beautiful for your own self growth and evolution.
Well, let's talk about that because this is part of your message today. It's the message about how to develop that deeper self-awareness, how to do that. Now, I will say, sometimes you'll cry about something and then the next feeling is anger.
Mm,
That's okay too.
no, definitely.
I will never get over Tom Cruise killing Rebecca Ferguson's character in Dead Reckoning Part One. Did you really have to go there, Tom? But I understand what he's doing. He's phasing out this part of his life, which has to be hard and sad for him. He's phasing out multiple decades of something that he was so identified with. So how do you do that in life? How do you come to the place of a level of self-awareness where you understand that life is one transition after another?
Mhm.
It's one change after another. So
Yeah.
talk to us about developing a deeper level of self-awareness.
Well, this is I think it's important. I want to just look at my notes real quick so I make sure I say it. Like who we are, why we think the way we do, what triggers us. Like all of this is around developing a deeper sense of self-awareness. And when you can be aware of like your why and what's going on for you, there is the point of power. First of all, it's in the present moment. Point of power is in the present moment. What you can and can't do in the past or in the future is gone, but you can in the moment. But sometimes we don't know our drivers of behavior. Why is this upsetting me? Why am I frustrated? Why am I crying? Why am I so happy? Why does this feel like nerve-wracking? Like it helps us to sit with all of our emotions for a bit, to be like and feel them instead of either negate them or push them off or say they're not right. So that first level is self-awareness. And that whole idea is, can I see the parts of myself coming up and be nuanced in accepting them? So I'm not all right or wrong or good or bad. Like this is why this is triggering me, and I know why this is happening. And I have a choice in the present moment about what I want to do. Or am I just going to spiral? Right. And so this is kind of coming to the power of the present moment. When you know yourself and you love yourself, then you can take action and congruent with your highest values, with what you know to be true for you. And you can also not negate like why some things are harder than others. Right? You can also not negate why some things are making you more emotional, or where some things are going to be hard for you. And I feel like just knowing that and not having to pretend that um, it's all fine or good. Like you say, this is why this is hard for me. This is why this triggers me. That's the point of power, is like that knowledge about you can be incredibly powerful. And the other thing I want to say is um, most of us, if you look back in your life, when you have experienced personal growth, it is from some level of understanding yourself. So like that tie into, why don't I feel like I want to cry in front of people? I hadn't like unpacked that forever, but now it's so powerful because I notice when I tend to not want to express myself or think I'm not important or I shouldn't cry, I can now, I have personal growth around that, that is so valuable. that is like, I see how the connection piece is like, it wasn't good to go through it, but I went through it and now I've learned from it. And now it's a powerful tool, right? For me, it's a powerful tool. It also, I think, helps me be a better therapist. I'm not afraid of people's tears. I'm not afraid at all of people crying. And I
Yeah,
embrace emotions a lot. So I think too, you can look in your own life and see where your personal growth is like in terms of like naming things, owning them, looking at your past, understanding it. And that to me is so valuable. So don't negate that or kind of jump over that in terms of like, I just want things to be better. Sometimes it's in the learning that the value is there and then you can use it later. And that's vital.
yeah, it is. I mean, this is a very powerful conversation today because, if you're living in the United States, you're seeing things change rapidly, and most people are not aware of what's happening. Not everybody gets a pop-up feed like I do. I try to because of what I do for a living, I have to stay alert. But, in the world we live in, we have been given incredible capacity to handle just about everything, haven't we? What's your personal message? What would you like to say to us about this? Because I think as human beings, we have been given extraordinary ability.
Yes. And that's why I don't want it to be essentially, I don't know, muffled or suffocated away by our anxiety and stress about like we have to be able to think about human capacity for managing nuance and complexity and holding opposites and feeling like I am so worried about this and I'm also so grateful I can take a walk today and the sun's on my face and I can be in this present moment, right? Or I can engage with my neighbor and have a good conversation. Or I can pet someone's dog and feel the love of just pure love of an animal, right? Like whatever it is, like can we hold something so we can keep our psyche in one place from spiraling? And again, I just have to see what I want to make sure I didn't miss my points. But one of the big things too is like, can we also see this as our progress towards being emotional resilient? Like I can handle emotions, I can think about them, and I'm resilient in the face
Mhm.
of stress, of overwhelm, of everything. I'm not going to let it essentially get
Yeah.
the best of me. How can I build my resilience? And that part of holding opposites, learning how to do that, thinking about it logically. Again, my truth, your truth, the truth, and facts. If you're going to debate something, debate the facts, but like process your truth, figure out, don't negate it, and find ways also to let other people share their truths in ways that like you're not trying to fix
Mhm.
it or solve it or change it. Sometimes it's just expressing and affirming,
Yeah.
okay, this is how you feel. So I think this is valuable right now as we're going through this really complex time. And just notice, I would encourage listeners just to notice how you can hold two things at once. You are capable of that and how strong that can make you. And like the practice of
Yeah.
doing that will help from the anxiety spiral that a lot of people are feeling.
And Carrie, life will have something show up very unexpectedly that you didn't know, which become very important in the learning curve. I found out recently my table tennis partner, gold medal table tennis partner, is very, very sick. And he continues to play, and I continue to play with him. But I'm still aware of where he is in his healing journey. And I don't know how it will turn out. But my job is to show up and honor him at the level that he is showing up.
Hmm.
It doesn't mean I'm not thinking and I'm not sad and I want to fix it, but that's not what they need right now. They just want to play a game and they want to play it to the best they can and they want to have fun.
Hmm.
So I have to hold both, that this
Yeah.
is somebody very important to me. And I have to hold that the way to honor him is not to take on the burden of what I think an outcome might or may not be for him. So we have to think of how do we honor each other in this game of mutual respect. And I think thank you for bringing this topic up today, because we don't do it well with our children. We certainly have a very bizarre situation in the workplace, but we can create that change. This is an inside job. And I think that's your point today, isn't it?
Hmm. And I think too, remembering the nuances of feelings, remember that like knowing why and how we get triggered, but also why we may or may not
Mm,
feel comfortable expressing our emotions, but seeing it as a pathway towards something better, right? Something better than either staying stuck or also not either staying stuck, not feeling like you have permission, not feeling like you're worthy, or always losing in the comparative suffering game. All those things to me are not helpful and are not healthy and are not what I would wish for anybody, right? So that's the goal of today, to be able to think about that. Like on the other side of that is expression, knowledge, self-awareness, permission, right? It also is a little bit of, to me, thinking beyond the moment of my stress to be like, I have some emotional resilience here. I have some emotional agility. I have some opportunities to think a different way, which might help me. And that to me is really hopeful
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, and help you and others. Kari Knutson, everybody, go to knutsonspeaks.com. Kari, thank you for this topic. Emily, thank you for pushing all the right buttons. Y'all are the best audience on the planet. We'll see you next time.
You have been listening to Get Big Out Loud Radio, where we explore the complex, funny, and beautiful ride of life with me, Kari Knutson, joining Dr. Pat live every second Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific on TransformationTalkRadio.com. I will help you to know which thoughts are keeping you small in order for you to get big. Get big and live your life out loud. For more information, visit KnutsonSpeaks.com.